All right. So this is half time of the course. The end of the ancient world, the beginning of the medieval world. In other words, somebody's passing by. All right. So the difference is Christianity. Right? The difference is Christianity. And therefore, Constantine is the central figure. We talked about Constantine last time around. A couple of things that we mentioned were, I don't know, he made Christianity a legal religion in the Roman Empire. He converted to Christianity personally, in his own way, something that was, atypical. Usually when you convert to Christianity, first thing that they do, they baptize you. Well, he kind of wasn't baptized immediately. He waited till practically when he died. He was baptized at his deathbed. But if you're an emperor, you have certain privileges and you can make certain choices. Don't do anything we don't want you to do. So, that's the part that we covered. We talked about his mother, who went on an archaeological expedition to find places associated with the new religion, with Jesus and his apostles. And a couple of important places were established that are still very important for Christianity today, like the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. That's where Jesus was buried. They built a magnificent church. The Romans were great builders, especially Constantine. Constantine built like crazy. So, and his buildings are huge, made out of brick and concrete, very solid buildings, so a lot of them stand still today. So, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, where the Pope sits right now. It's a new church. The Constantine built the previous one. This one was, that one came down after 15 centuries, and the new one was built. But that's Helena. Helena, mother of Constantine, who went on this archaeological expedition and tried to find a lot of places associated with the religion after 300 years of the beginnings of religion, and established those sort of a basic holy spots that existed in ancient Rome. So, medieval, right? We start now medieval, which means between the ages, between the ages. Between the ages. And that's between the ancient world, which was what the Christians called pagan, right? Polytheists, belief in any God. And now, with Christianity, we come to the Christian world. Modern world is secular. That's how we kind of mark the beginning of the modern world, beginning of secular, what we call separation of church and state, right?
All this happened after Jesus died, right?
Yes, yes. So Constantine became emperor in 306, and he ruled for 31 years. So that's Constantine. After Constantine, you have a couple of his sons take over, and a big family. Some of them he killed. That's a minor story. And we have the first major crisis in 378 AD, when Germans started coming in. So, a couple of things about Constantine, just as a refresher. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he had this vision of a cross that showed up in the sky and so on and so forth. And the Edict of Milan is the Edict of Toleration. tolerating, and organization of the church, right? The church councils, system of government, and so on and so forth. Arianism, the first struggles to define who Jesus was, and come to some, in other words, come to some sort of a common understanding of the new faith. And therefore, the Council of Nicaea. There are some things that is not mentioned here. I think it's very important, and I told you about it. One of the things that Constantine did was introducing a new coinage, solidus. These economic reforms have to do with Diocletian. In many ways, he continued what Diocletian did, except just turn it around by recognizing Christianity. Diocletian was very anti-Christian, and Constantine was the opposite. But this introduction of new currency, solidus, a golden coin, which stayed in circulation for another 1,000 years, was the main coin of the medieval Europe. So anyways, fairly important. But the Germans were coming. Battle of Adrianople, 378. That's the beginning of the German invasions. And let me pull out the map so you kind of see what was going on. So we want Istanbul. The new city that Constantine built is now called Istanbul, but it used to be called Constantinople, city of Constantine, and it became the new Rome. Actually, this was also a process that was going on before Constantine for a while. Rome loses its importance. And this is just an indication that the empire was changing its character. From being a Mediterranean empire, Diocletian first settled here in Nicaea, outside of Istanbul, and then Constantine built the new Rome, new capital in what is today Istanbul, the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Why there? Because the barbarians were coming. Germans, Slavs, and Istanbul was perfect here to stop the barbarian invasions across the Danube. This border here is the Danube River, goes all the way to Germany, and this was the border of the Roman Empire. A huge river, the largest river in Europe, that divided the Romans and the barbarians. So it was very easy from Istanbul to reach there, and very easy from Istanbul to reach the main enemy of the Romans, and that was the Persian Empire, Iran. So you can defend this territory very well. Well, the first to come into the Roman Empire were the Goths. In particular, Visigoths, which means Western Goths. Western Goths. They come in, the Roman Emperor was waiting for them at Adrianople. It's right here close to Istanbul. This is going to be a story that is repeated. You know, they were pushed by another tribe that was moving in, and they asked the Romans to get into the empire for protection. They came in, the Romans didn't treat them well, they rebelled, and killed the emperor in person in 378. That's why this was such a big deal, this Battle of Adrianople. The beginning of the German invasions. They go into these become really complicated. Okay. The division of the Roman Germanic kingdoms. Here. This is sort of a map of these invasions. Not a very good one. What is interest for us here, because we're trying to get to today, right? The point of our course and the next one, Western Civ 2, is going to come today. So the course is really about how certain things came to be. Well, the short story is that Germans started crossing the Rhine, the river, and the Danube, and coming into the empire. The first were the Visigoths, and actually the Visigoths have a very strange trajectory. They moved across the Balkans. In 410 they sacked Rome. Why? Just kind of they were looking for land, and the Romans were not willing to give it away, and they had to force them to do it, and they did it eventually. Eventually, the Visigoths settled here in the south of France and moved into Spain, and Spain became the state of the Visigoths. In other words, the process is going to be the same for all the tribes that moved in from 378 all the way to 476, when the last Roman emperor was kicked out. So about 100 years of various people coming in. For us, the important is the final result. And the final result starts with Visigoths settled in Spain. The Ostrogoths, who came a little bit later, Eastern Goths, settled in Italy. And there'll be another German tribe coming in to settle in Italy a little bit later, but let's mention that here, Lombards. Lombardy, there is a still province in Italy that's called Lombardy, and its capital is Milan, and that's where these Lombards settled. Who else do we have? We have the Franks. It's funny when you think about it, but where did they settle? Huh?
Where they settled?
Where did they settle? Where did the Franks settle?
Frankfurt.
In France.
Frank's not right.
Frankfurt is sort of land of their origin,
Oh,
or where they came from, right? But they settled in France. Who else do we have? We have Angles and Saxons. Angles and Saxons. They settled in Britain. And we have, well, there are, I don't know, several other tribes like Burgundians who settled here in the south, east France, Burgundy wine. Minor point, smaller tribes. And we're just going to go for the big ones. Another one interesting are the Vandals. Because the word vandalism comes from them. So they were really nice and polite people, full of consideration for fellow human beings. Well, in general, Germans were rough. These Germans were rough. Vandals settled in Africa. What is Tunis, right? Today, Tunis. Here. Carthage. They took down Carthage and the whole coast of Algeria today. So this is your outcome of the Germanic invasions. How did it happen in detail? It's a long story and it goes forever, and it's not really important for us. We want to know the final result. But a couple of interesting things. So Franks were Germans because they came from Frankfurt or thereabout. They settled in France. So before France, France was called Gaul, right? Remember Julius Caesar? Julius Caesar conquered Gaul and the Gauls. And the French have this beautiful cartoon. Asterix? Remember Asterix? No? Anyways, if you're into comic strips and that sort of things, check it out. It's very funny. Asterix. Takes place during the time of Caesar conquering Gaul and a group of Gauls who are actually Celts. Resist the Romans. So anyways, that's what the comic strip is about. But what I want to talk about is these three layers of European population, of European ethnicity. First is the layer of Celts. Celts lived in Europe before the Romans. And then there is a layer of Romans, and then finally there is a layer of Germans. So for example, in France they speak German today, right? No? No, I'm just kidding. In France they speak French, and it's a language related to the Romans, a Latin language. So, throughout medieval Europe, even to today, but you have this interaction between the oldest layer of the Celts, and then the middle layer of the Romans, and the new layer of the Germans on the top. So these Franks came into Gaul and renamed it. They called it Franks. But actually around the year 500, king of the Franks was called Clovis. Actually, which is, today it became Louis. So Clovis is a German word. Louis is French. A lot of French kings throughout history had the name of Louis after the first Louis, Clovis. He was baptized, became a Christian, and more importantly, by becoming Christian, he also became Roman. Because the language of the church was Latin, language of the Romans. So once you become Christian, you also accept within the language, and before you know it, they are no longer speaking German, they're speaking Latin, or what is Old French here. And this happened in other places. Clovis is a good example. But Visigoths in Spain are not a bad example either. Visigoths, for example, built their capital in the city of Toledo, which is a city just outside of Madrid. It's an ancient capital of Spain, and it's the Visigoth capital of Spain. That's where the Visigoths had their of all the days and all the times, they have to do it now. Huh?
You can close it.
It's not gonna help us, it's too loud. Let me show you Toledo, so we can kind of, I can lighten up. Toledo City in Ohio, no, Toledo, Spain. It's a beautiful city. I'll turn on the lights for a second so you can see it. It's a beautiful city on the hill. It's a typical medieval city. That's what the medieval cities look like. You know, on a hill by the river, so you have the water, the city walls that protect you from invaders, and a cathedral at the top. This cathedral is where the Archbishop of Spain still resides, and this is a castle sort of built a little bit later, but it doesn't really matter. That's sort of your typical medieval setting. We'll see it again and again and again. Here in Toledo, because that's Toledo, and in Ohio we have Toledo, right? There's Toledo, Ohio, there's Toledo in Spain. So Visigoths set their capital, and gradually these Visigoths merge with the local population of the Romans, and they become what we call today Spaniards. So far so good about the Germans. I told you before that Germanic invasions that happened from 378 to 476 were just the first part of the whole story. The story actually goes in several steps. There was a Roman reaction to the Germans. Germans conquered the western part of the empire. If you notice here, all this area, Spain, Italy, Lombardy, France, Britain, Africa, are in the western part of the Roman Empire. They didn't penetrate the eastern parts of the Roman Empire, and the reason for it was very simple. The walls of Constantinople, in order to get into the eastern parts of the empire, where actually the riches were, the eastern parts were richer than the western parts, you have to pass through Istanbul, which is Constantinople. And that's why Constantine built it here, so that he can stop these barbarians like the Visigoths came into across the Danube. And they couldn't go further than Istanbul. So the eastern part of the empire was saved. And not only saved, but let me show you another guy called Justinian. That Justinian, he ruled from 527 to 565. Where did they put the Justinian? 527 to 565 AD. He is associated with an attempt to reconstitute the Roman Empire. So what he tried to do is he tried to kick the barbarians out of the Western Empire. Did it work? Yes and no. In other words, he managed to conquer Italy, take back Italy from the Germans, parts of Spain, in the south of Spain, but not France. And he took Africa from the Mantles back. The problem was that it didn't last. After he died, the whole effort kind of collapsed, and the Lombards then come back into Italy and continue living as if nothing happened. But Justinian could well be considered one of the last of Roman emperors. What he was famous for is a couple of things. The wars of reconquest, trying to get out the Germans. The law. Actually, when we think of Roman law, which was something that, they ask you so many times on these quizzes and exams, Roman law, Roman law, Roman law. Well, it was Justinian who actually put it together into books, and that's what we have. He was a great builder. Built probably the most spectacular Christian church of the time. And not just of that time, but some people say of all times. He built a church in Istanbul. And this is what it looks like. The church is called Hagia Sophia, or it means the Holy Wisdom. It was not just the largest church in Christian world for about 1,000 years, but it was the largest dome ever built up to that time. This is the dome from the inside. The dome is about 100 feet wide, and it stands at the height of over 120 feet from the floor level. So it was a spectacular building. To such an extent that there is a famous story about the Russians who came in to see it, and after seeing Hagia Sophia, or the Church of the Holy Wisdom, that's what it means, Holy Wisdom. It's actually, when the Russians came to see it, they were immediately converted to Christianity because they'd never seen something like it. So anyways, that's one of the stories associated with it. About the name of the church, Holy Wisdom, is actually, the church is dedicated not to a person with wisdom or anything of that sort, but it's dedicated to Jesus, who is considered the wisdom of God. So anyways, that's just a footnote, a minor point. Justinian. What comes after Justinian is the end for the Romans. Justinian was the last attempt of the Romans to preserve the empire, but it failed. They failed after Justinian died, for two particular reasons. There were two more invasions. One was of the Slavs, who came from the north, So Slavs settled in the Balkans. All these countries that you have here, with the exception of Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, are Slavic countries. So they settled here in the Balkans and took control of it. And the other thing that happened was the Arab invasions. Arabs came from the south and took the whole of the Middle East, including North Africa. About Slavic invasions, we know very little. They're sort of a bit of a mystery for history. We're not sure where those Slavs exactly came from. Some people say they came from here, some people say they came from here. But the point is, as I told you before, the point of this class is kind of to explain the world as it is today and how it came to be this way. And Eastern Europe is, by and large, populated by Slavic people, like Poles, Czechs, Croatians, Serbians, Bulgarians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and so on and so forth. With the exception of Romanians. Romanians claim to be descendants of ancient Romans. Therefore, Romania. That's a fairly complicated story, but let's stay with that one. And Hungary, which is associated with another tribe. We'll get to Hungarians in some other later on, chapters 8 and 9. Arabs. Arab invasions. So, in other words, bringing down the Roman Empire was a 1-2-3 operation. 1, Germans. 2, Slavs. 3, Arabs. And I want to talk a little bit more about Arabs than about the Germans, because, I don't know, it's always in the news and it's important. Arabs lived in the Roman Empire, including the city of Damascus was a famous Arab city. Damascus in Syria. And Damascus was part of the Roman Empire. Across the border of the Roman Empire, and that's here, it's the Jordan River, you get into the Arabia, land of the Arabs. And some of these Arabic tribes were Christian. And they were usually allied with the Romans. That's how it happened. They converted to Christianity and became Roman allies, and they defended tribes who were living here in Jordan and other parts of Arabia. They were living here outside the Roman Empire, but they were protecting the Romans from Arabs who were still pagan, right? Polytheists. This is not the first time that it happened. This was also a strategy that the Romans tried to apply to the Germans. The border was the Rhine River and the Danube River, and there were tribes over here, and the Romans tried to have some tribes living close to the border allied with themselves to protect them from the tribes who were further in and further away from the Romans. So the whole thing is that these events are not just invasions, but actually a bit of a mixture being made. Mixture of Romans and Germans, Romans and Arabs, and Romans and so on and so forth. Anyways, what happened to the Arabs was Muhammad. Born around 570 AD. We're not sure exactly the year, roughly, but Muslims today celebrate Muhammad's birthday, so we'll stick to that traditional date. So, pardon me. That's my cat. It's not cold, I hope, right? Muhammad was born here, way outside of the Roman Empire, on the shores of the Red Sea that divides Egypt from Arabia, in the city of Mecca. Mecca. And Mecca actually is closer to Ethiopia than it is to the Roman Empire. From Mecca, you cross over and you're in Ethiopia. Well, Eritrea is a province of Ethiopia that's separated, so it's an ancient Ethiopia. So you just cross over and, well, that happened too. Muhammad was an orphan, and he married a wealthy woman called Khadija. It's spelled in various kinds of ways. And this gave an opportunity to Muhammad to manage her wealth. And managing wealth was a caravan trade, camels, going from Mecca to Medina, all the way to Damascus and back. There, Muhammad came in contact with Jews living in Palestine and in Syria. There were Jews living in Damascus too. There were Jews living actually in Medina. And Christians. And at some point, the traditional story goes that he had a revelation. In other words, one day, he went to a cave outside of Mecca, and he started hearing voices. And the voices told him to read, which in Arabic is Qur'an, and therefore the Quran, right? So the problem was that Muhammad was illiterate. He didn't know how to read or write. So he said, what should I do? Anyways, the tradition goes that he received these revelations and recited them. He would come down from the hill and recited them to his first followers, including his wife, right? Khadija, who was, technically speaking, then the first Muslim, because she accepted this message of Muhammad. And these are the earliest parts of the Quran. The message was relatively simple, and it's a message that you've heard before in Christian religion and in Jewish religion, and that is basically the kingdom of God, the judgment of God is coming, therefore repent, run for your lives, and things of that sort. Get ready for God to intervene and judge this world. This is the message that we call the apocalyptic. Apocalyptic means to lift up, to reveal. And therefore, one of the translations is a revelation. And it's usually a revelation about the last things. What's going to happen at the end of the world. Well, what's going to happen in the end of the world is the judgment of God is coming. God is going to come and judge the living and the dead, and so on and so forth. This message was not well received in Mecca. And Muhammad had to flee in the year 622. It's the year of Hijrah, which means the year of the flight, when Muhammad had to flee from Mecca to Medina. In Medina, he found friendly people, including one Jewish tribe that was living in Medina. Ancient cities, I told you that before, no harm in repeating it, were often divided into various neighborhoods, and a neighborhood would be populated by a certain tribe. So one of the neighborhoods in Medina was a Jewish neighborhood, and they also welcomed Muhammad in. And it seems actually at first that this is a bit of a controversial issue. But it seems at first that Muslims were actually praying in the direction of Jerusalem, that they considered in the way that the Jews do. And it was only later on that actually the direction of the prayer was reversed towards Mecca, once Muhammad actually conquered Mecca as a city. But let's get there one step at a time. The new religion was actually probably the simplest to understand of all these three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It has what is called the 5 pillars. 5 pillars. One is what is called Shahada, the confession of faith, which means you have to say that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the prophet of God, and once you say it, you become a Muslim. Well, in front of witnesses, right? So this confession of faith kind of tells you a lot about Islam. It's the reason we're talking about it here is this is not a class on religion, but a class on history. So Muhammad used Islam to unite all the Arabs with this new religion and set them on a conquest, on a path toward conquest that took them all the way from Spain to China within the next 100 years. After his death, he died in 632 AD. And he died victorious. He came from Medina and conquered the city of Mecca. And there seems to have happened a lot of new things for religion. For example, there was an old sanctuary in Mecca, which is still around actually. I'll show you a picture of what it looks like today. It's called Kaaba. There it is. We have a photo. A little bit on the small side. But okay. Show you. Turn on the lights. This is this building in the middle. This is, of course, all later buildings, but especially the Istanbul. But this is called the Kaaba, and the Muslims are going around. It's one of the it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, one of the things that, you know, Muslims have to do. They have to make a confession of faith. They have to pray 5 times a day. They have to go to a pilgrimage once in their lifetime. They have to go to the pilgrimage to Kaaba. But what Muhammad made out of Kaaba, it's very interesting. It has to do with our Abraham and Sarah story that we had in the beginning. And that's why I actually mentioned it in the beginning when we're doing, you know, ancient Mesopotamia. You remember the story of Abraham and Sarah? Who was their son? Isaac and Ishmael. And in the Jewish scripture, in the Bible, we have Isaac being the firstborn. Ishmael does not count. Well, Muhammad turned it around. And he made Ishmael into the firstborn. And when God ordered Abraham to sacrifice his firstborn son, he sacrificed Ishmael over here, or he was about to sacrifice, and then God said, no, don't kill your son, I was just testing you. Remember that story? Right. So it's just the names are exchanged and the places are exchanged. In the Jewish religion, Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac in Jerusalem. Here, this is happening in Mecca. Why did he do that? There are a lot of examples of this kind in Islam. For example, you have the whole story about Jesus in the Quran. And parts of the Quran that come from Mecca. There are parts of the Quran that come from Medina, parts of the Quran that come from Mecca. Depending, like, you know, the time of life in Muhammad. And they're very different in their tone, in their message. Jesus, for example, was born not in a manger, as we have it in the Gospel, but actually in a very nice oasis with palm trees. Is it important? Not too much, but there is a one point that Muhammad makes about it that denies the crucifixion. Jesus was one of the prophets, according to Islam, according to Muhammad, but he was not crucified. It only appeared to the people at that time that was crucified, but it was a trick. He ran away and so on and so forth. So there are these little differences that actually account for a lot of animosities that exist between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I have to. Islam is an iconic religion, like Judaism. It doesn't allow images. And it doesn't allow any sort of mediators between God and a believer. So, for example, when Muhammad died in 632 AD, his successor, Abu Bakr, said, Muhammad is dead. But Allah lives. So Prophet, the founder of Islam, is just an ordinary person. He was a prophet, and actually that's a really important point in Islam. He is the last prophet. That's what the Confession of Faith said, one of the 5 pillars. The Confession of Faith says there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. But what is the way it says in Arabic? It means that Muhammad is the last and the best messenger of God. So therefore, according to Islam, previous revelation are on the one hand acknowledged. So Jesus was a prophet. John the Baptist of the Christian was a prophet. Moses of the Jews was a prophet. But the last and the best prophet is Muhammad. So Christians and Jews got it wrong. And their revelation is, yeah, okay, but it wrong in many details. And that's going to be a source of a lot of historical fights, especially between the Christians and the Muslims, that's going to start right now. Right, so I was losing track of time, right? I'm not over time. Anyways, so when Muhammad died in 632, his successor was called successor. And in Arabic, that's caliph. Caliph, which means successor. Successor of Muhammad. And it immediately became an issue. Who is going to be the successor of Muhammad? Muhammad didn't have sons. But he had daughters. And one of his daughters was called Fatima. And she married Muhammad's cousin, Ali. So there were people among the early Muslims who believed that Ali, as the closest male relative to Muhammad, should be the next caliph, the successor of Muhammad. That did not happen. The tribal council of the Arabs met and they elected Abu Bakr. And to this day, this is a division between two kinds of Islam. This kind of Islam is called Sunni, and this is called Shia. Often the Shia Muslims are called after Fatima, Fatimids. Fatimids. To get back to history, because we sort of have a religious interlude here, because, and I thought maybe I said a little bit more than it's in the book or something, at the expense of the poor Germans. But for the contemporary world, I think it's very important to know some basic things about Islam. In 636 AD, there was the first battle between the Romans and the Arabs at the river called Yarmouk, which is a river in Jordan. Over here, at the border between Jordan and Israel. So the Arabs started moving into the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was ruled by Emperor Heraclius. And at this point, the Roman Empire was actually just, Emperor Heraclius was finishing a 30-year-long war between the Roman and the Persian Empire. So when the Arabs showed up at the borders of the Roman Empire, the empire was exhausted after a 30 years war between the Romans and the Persians. And they came at the right moment. The Arabs won this battle and started moving into Syria very quickly. In the 640s, they crossed the Sinai Peninsula and got into Egypt and founded, actually Cairo is a new city that they founded over there. By 711 AD, Arabs were here, and this place he called Gibraltar. Which comes from Jabal el Tariq. Jabal. Jabal Hill of Tariq. This was the Arab general, the Muslim general, who actually crossed over into Spain in 711 and defeated the Visigoths. And took control practically of the whole of Spain, with just one exception. A lot of you guys are here of Hispanic or Latino origin, as they say. And this is a very important part of the Hispanic identity. This is sort of the story of Spain, the story of Spain, the story of Don Pelayo. Don Pelayo of Asturias. Anybody heard of him? No? Now you do. Okay. Asturias is a mountainous country right here in the north of Spain. Here you have the city of Oviedo, which is the capital of Asturias. And all through here are very high mountains. So this is where Asturias is, up in the mountains of northern Spain. That's where the Arabs failed to conquer. So Asturias became the spot of resistance to the Arabs. And actually there is a whole story about it, how Don Pelayo had a vision of a cross. Anyways, let me show you a picture of Don Pelayo, of a modern monument up there. Oof. Don Pelayo, right? Right. That's sort of a painting of him, but there is a whole story that this cross is called the Cross of Asturias. Imaginary portrait. The story is very similar to the story that you heard about Constantine. and he had a vision of a cross in the sky, and he took that cross and started what is in Spanish history called the beginning of Reconquista. Heard of that term? Maybe Reconquista, right. It's like this. I think so. Huh? Taking back Spain from the Arabs. This is not something that is happening only in Spain. It was a problem for what was left of the Roman Empire. Because when we started in 370, so let's kind of recap this, because there's a lot of information here. When we started the story in 378, the Roman Empire controlled everything from Britain, France, Spain, Italy, the Balkans, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, all around the northern part of Africa, right? There is a coastal plains of North Africa here that are part of the Roman Empire. That's how we started. This was a huge empire, and it existed for several hundred years, at least. Well, there were these wars between Rome and Carthage. Started in 250 AD, BC. And these were the wars, who was going to rule the Mediterranean? And that's the wars that the Romans won, and they created their empire. And now this empire is falling apart, as I said, in 3 steps. The first steps were the Germans coming in, the Visigoths into Spain, the Vandals into North Africa, the Ostrogoths into Italy, the Franks into France, and the Angles and Saxons. Their homeland is actually here on the border between Netherlands, Holland, and Germany, Frisia. They came over and conquered Britain. So the western parts were gone. The Slavs settled in the Balkans and threatened Constantinople for a couple of centuries. Throughout this period, from roughly 500, from the times of Justinian, the Slavs were a threat to Constantinople, and they settled here. And then we have in 636, the Arabs coming in, defeating the Romans here in Syria, conquering quickly Syria, and then Egypt, then spreading, coming to Spain in 711, conquering the whole of Spain actually, to a point that in 722, they came right here, all the way in France, to the city of, well, there are 2 cities here, Tours and Poitiers. The battle happened kind of halfway between these 2 cities. And that's where the Arabs, the Muslim armies, were defeated and prevented from conquering the rest of Europe. And it happened, well, look at the map, it happened really in the middle of France. So, from that victory at Poitiers, or sometimes people say at Tours, you might find the Tours also in the book. The kings of France became a predominant power in Europe. And this was going to be like this for a long time in the Middle Ages. So, to make a long story short, the process of disintegration of Roman Empire lasted for good 300-400 years. And it was a violent process. There were such things as, German invasions and Slavic invasions and Arab invasions, and there were battles that were fought. And that were won and lost. And the overall outcome is that in one way, the Roman power completely collapsed. But in some other ways, it wasn't so. The Roman ways, the Roman language, the Roman religion, Christianity, continued. And a lot of these invaders, like Germans and Arabs and Slavs, well, Germans and Slavs adopted Christianity and gradually merged into what was left of the Roman culture. This did not happen with the Arabs. Arabs had a different religion, and therefore there was no that kind of interaction. But Arabs, early Arabic caliphs, really depended on the Romans a lot for their skills in law, for their skills in building things, roads, buildings, and and things of that sort. So you look at the early mosques, the houses of prayer that the Muslims built. And they were built exactly like Christian churches. The first mosque in Damascus, it was built, looks like a Christian church. And why? Because the Roman builders built it for the Arabs. Damascus. Well, you can see here it's the form of what the Romans called basilica, which is that building built like a church, has a row of columns and and the pews in between. The form originates from the Roman law court. The Roman court would meet in such a building. So that's where it originates. But so at this point, the unity of the Mediterranean was shattered. Now we have what we call Europe, here up in the north, and the Middle East, and North Africa, down in the south. And this world on the north is a Christian world, and this world in the south is a Muslim world. They're different, they're going to develop differently, they're going to be at war for another, 1,000 years and so forth. But in a way, in terms of our Western civilization, so far, Western civilization is really about Europe. I told you so in the beginning. If you want to expand it a little bit more, well, it's about, the Christian civilization, and that will include North America and South America and so forth. But at this point, we leave the Middle East behind. That part is now part of the Arab world. And Europe is going to be part of the Christian world of the Middle Ages. And that's enough for now, right?